You've had a remarkable career for more than 30 years, producing well-known TV shows like Dancing with the Stars, The Bachelor, SA's Got Talent, Come Dine With Me, Idols, X Factor, and the list can just go on. What drives you to still keep on going and doing what you're doing?
I just don't see myself ever really just sitting down and being retired in a very traditional kind of sense. I'd be so bored. It is all consuming. It's a non-stop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week business. Sometimes that squeezes out the time to be able to be available for people and be able to speak into people's lives.
How do you define success?
I am the master of my own time. You're either a meeting taker or a meeting maker. So for me, one of the signs of success for me is to be in a position where I'm not taking meetings, left, right, and center. I'm making meetings that work for me.
What does it practically mean for you to find your identity in Christ rather than your career success?
Early on in my career, I attached my identity initially to money. Pursuing a number, I put the number up and I hit that number. And within like 30 days after that, I lost everything. I lost 95% of the revenue. And so I went through that phase of really just kind of seeking the Lord in this, and then making that correction, and then seeing the Lord evident in all the decisions and business flowing to us and everything else and coming back out of that.
Was there any moment where your faith cost you?
There have been times, but I think in every case, it was a short-term cost. There was a point where Mnet decided that they were going to explore erotic/soft porn kind of content, and it was just content I couldn't do. It started to create friction between myself and the management. And again, it was tough. What my wife and I did is we went to the office on a Sunday. There was nobody in the building, and we went and sat in one of the boardrooms, and we just prayed and waited on the Lord. And every time we believed we'd heard something from the Lord, we'd write it down. And that was so powerful. One of the things that we came out of that with, which we didn't even anticipate, was...
Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to another podcast of the Heart of Man podcast by Men's Wealth. And just to remind you guys again that Men's Wealth is about calling men into authentic manhood. And our vision is to set men up to understand their true identity and purpose as a man, as a husband, a father, and a business leader. So today, I've got the privilege of having Duncan Erwin with me. Duncan, thank you for joining us. Duncan is a husband. He's been married for nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
He's a father of two and also a very successful businessman. So, Duncan, I just want to introduce you to our listeners. So, Duncan, you've had a remarkable career for more than 30 years. In 1993, you founded Rapid Blue, and you were also the CEO and have grown Rapid Blue to become the biggest producer of prime television programs in Africa. And through Rapid Blue, you did productions in nearly every African country, producing more than 6,000 hours of television, including well-known TV shows, major shows like Dancing with the Stars, The Bachelor, SA's Got Talent, Come Dine With Me, Idols, X Factor, and the list obviously can just go on. And then you sold Rapid Blue to BBC in 2022, and currently you're a shareholder and director in InnovaSure, a dynamic solutions provider in the energy space. And further to that, you also have a media and entertainment company, also in the industry, in the television industry. And then last but not the least, you're also someone who enjoys adventure, climbing mountains, running in mountains, and just having fun. So Duncan, thanks for your time once again, and thanks for being here. A lot of people at the age of 59, when they've reached the successes that you've reached before in business, they would, retire and sit somewhere and enjoy life. What drives you to still keep on going and doing what you're doing?
So let me flip it. I think I just don't see myself ever really just sitting down and being retired in the very traditional kind of sense. I think I'd be so bored, So I just I'm energized by being in business, doing new things. I'm loving finding this middle space between running big projects, but at the same time being sort of involved in startups. I am, financially, I'm a bit more cautious now, but, it's that classic thing, when you're in your 30s and 40s, you just go big, and then you've got to start changing gear a little bit. So sometimes when I sit down with my wife and I go, look, I really want to do this, but we're going to have to put X amount of our money into it, it's a much harder conversation now than it was. But no, I love it. I couldn't ever see myself not working on something. Okay. And for me, it's not work. In fact, the more dynamic the environment, the more energized I am by it. Yeah. So I'm loving it.
Yeah. And Duncan, in today's world as well, it's very competitive out there. There's so many different definitions of success. If you just look for me as a in his 40s year old guy, looking also obviously to build a business and reaching a certain definition of success that I have of success. If I would ask you to define success, how do you define success, thinking back of your career and also thinking of the next 10 to 20 years?
I think for me, the definition for myself is 2 or 3 things. I think the first one is that I am the master of my own time. So a friend of mine had this comment. He said, "You're either a meeting taker or a meeting maker." And I think, when we're coming up, you're a meeting taker. If somebody says, "I can meet with you on Wednesday at 10 a.m., you make that work. So for me, one of the signs of success for me is to be in a position where I'm not taking meetings, left, right, and center. I'm making meetings that work for me. And that also speaks to a bigger kind of picture in terms of just how much control you have of your environment and the work that you're doing and the businesses that you're involved in. The second one for me is to be able to have the time and the ability to be able to invest in other people. Because sometimes, particularly when it's your own business, it is all consuming, it's, largely you kind of feel it's all on your shoulders and everything else. So sometimes that squeezes out the time to be able to, be available for people and be able to speak into people's lives and to be of benefit to them. So I enjoy that part of it. And to be able to do it almost kind of in the flow. So not even in a structured kind of way. And then for me, it's, the way that I designed the sort of exit out of Rapid Blue, which was very consuming as a business. The film and television industry it's a non-stop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week business. Was to synchronize it with my kids kind of finishing varsity. And so we geared our life around that. So we came out. And so the third one for me is to be able to spend as much time as I can with my kids. And it gets harder and harder the older they get, So
okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll get back to that later, just on the family side of running a business and being a father also. That's, that's present. But one thing you mentioned now is to invest, having enough time to invest in other people. Why is that important to you? And why do you think, just in general, as a businessman and as a man running after God's heart as well, to have that maximum impact, why is it important to invest in other people?
I think objectively it is important. The whole concept of being able to mentor people is so powerful. And I think even just from a learning point of view, the concept of apprenticing, for me, you always learn a lot more than just textbooks, but fundamentally for me, it's a thrill for me. It's a joy for me. I love it. I love the ability to be able to sit with somebody and they might be grappling with something, and then through the benefit of hard lessons learned, I can kind of invest into that and see the lights come on, or see somebody be able to adjust course and be able to be in a better position than they were the day before. I think that's a blessing. I think that's, So, no, the big motivation is quite selfish.
Sure. And speaking on identity, which I think is a very important thing, something that we, the sooner you realize where your identity lies, the better, I believe. So a question I have for you is, what does it practically mean for you to find your identity in Christ rather than your career success?
Yeah, it's, look, fundamentally, it's critical. I mean, I can't even think of a stronger way of kind of saying that. I think I think one of the challenges, and certainly that I experienced, particularly early on in my career, was the fact that I attached my identity initially to money. It was like I'm building this business, and I had like financial goals and everything else, and I mean, separate thing, but I have this great testimony around that. When I was really young, pursuing a number, I put the number up. This is what and I hit that number, and within like 30 days after that, I lost everything.
Sure.
And that for me essentially was the Lord saying, where are you looking? Where is your focus?
Sure.
It was a massive learning curve for me. And then making that correction, and then kind of coming back, and then seeing the Lord evident in all the decisions, and business flowing to us and everything else, and coming back out of that, but having changed that focus away from kind of just the pursuit of money.
And just sorry to stop you there. So talk us through that. So I mean, you got this goal, you achieved this goal, and like you say, 30 days after that, you lost everything.
Yeah.
Just talk us through that. What went through your mind? Just your personal challenges that you faced through that time, and how did you turn that around?
Sure. Well, so I started my business when I was 23. So I was pretty young, and when I started the business, I got a contract, and I got this contract from Mnet, and it was a fantastic contract. And I'd done a management buyout from Mnet and set this all up, and so I knew the business model incredibly well. So, and I knew that within that model, if I hit all the kind of goals and markers that I'd set, I would achieve this. So we get to the end of the first year, we've done a really, really great job, and I go and meet with Mnet to renew, thinking this is a shoe-in. And literally, I remember, I mean, it was like the day before Christmas. So they delayed meeting with me and everything. And our contract, I think, was ended at the end of December. And eventually, sort of like the day before Christmas, they sat me down. They said, look, we really like you. We like what you're doing. But actually, we've decided to go with somebody else. Sure. And I had all my eggs in one basket. I mean, I'd built this business. I had, I think, 20 staff. I'd invested in edit suites and computers and everything. And yeah, in that one meeting, I lost 95% of the revenue, like gone. So in that crisis period, at that point, this lesson that I got from it wasn't evident. In that crisis moment, I was in crisis. So I was praying. I had home group, I had, my pastor friends, I had everybody. I was like, and so I went through that phase of really, really just kind of seeking the Lord in this. But then the sort of the next kind of steps were critical. So I knew that we only had enough cash to last a certain period of time, unless I could replace this revenue. And I knew that I had to have to shrink the business and everything else. And so I gathered some men around me, some friends, both church, both business, and that was phenomenal and really necessary for me because we came up with a short-term, medium-term plan, and they held me accountable. So literally every day they would phone me and say, "Did you do this?" And some of it was hard because some of it was I had to retrench people, and I was retrenching people who were much older than me. Some of them were married, some of them had, and the weight of that was probably the hardest day of my life to this point. Was walking that.
Sure.
But again, being held accountable, getting through that, working that, and we had enough cash. Once we'd done all of that restructuring, we had enough cash to get us to about June. In June, Mnet came back to me, the Supersport team came back to me and said, actually, we preferred working with you, and we're going to give you all this business back again. And that kind of kicked us back in, and we made it through. And off that, we built the business.
Wow.
But it was only about sort of like 2-3 months later, it was kind of as the Supersport work came, was kind of coming back in and everything else, you have this, praying and sitting there, in quiet, and suddenly it hits you, like a truck,
Wow.
this message from the Lord saying, so what are you going to focus on now?
Sure.
Now that this project's coming back, where is your focus? Where is your heart? Where, what are you looking at?
Wow. And that accountability that you just mentioned, I think that's also a critical part, of life.
Absolutely.
And becoming the man that God called you to be. So do you still practice that principle? Are you still accountable to other men?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that
but
you
not
value.
just in business, in terms of life.
general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
No,
Okay.
absolutely. I think it's critical.
Yeah.
I really do.
And how do you find those? Because I think a lot of men, it's something that sounds nice. It's a principle that you hear about. But I think a lot of men maybe don't understand how it works, or just where do I find these men?
Yeah.
So just on that, where if I'm someone asking you, Duncan, it sounds great.
Yeah.
But where do I find these men?
Yeah.
Someone who can really be honest with me, challenging me with the tough things in life, regarding my marriage, regarding my relationship with my kids, regarding building a business, regarding money, all of these things. Where do I find them?
Yeah, it's look, my walk with the Lord now is 35, 36 years. So during that period of time, my friendships and my friendship groups, have become, more and more men who are Christians, and so it's, to a certain extent, it's easier. Very early on, I had my pastor, who was a very good friend, who was very much my accountability partner. I had my Connect group where I could do the same. But I also had, there was a guy who headed up commercial airtime sales at Mnet. Not a Christian, but just a really, really nice guy and generous with his time and everything else, and a lot more experienced than me. So I asked if I could meet with him sort of once a week, and that helped too. But where I am now, the wonderful thing is that my accountability partners, who are also really good friends, have also known me for a really long time. Sure. And that's helpful, because sometimes when you sit down, you can see, you can feel, sometimes even before you get to the meeting, I think the Lord is nudging you around something. And when you sit down and when you go, how are things going with your wife? How are things going with your kids? How are things going in business, or whatever it is?
And I think that's also just something, being bold, asking, especially if you don't have someone like that, you've got relationships now for 35, 36 years. But if you don't have that, I guess it's also just being bold and going to ask someone.
Absolutely.
And then also just being vulnerable and sharing your thoughts and sharing your heart with them, and then also allowing them to give input into your life and to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing, and also just hearing what you're saying. And then Duncan, how do you discern, just on this identity, before we move on to the next topic I want to discuss, is how do you discern between ambition and calling? Because again, just at my age, and I guess at every phase in your life, there's a sort of ambition. When you're in your 20s, in your 30s, whether you're 70 or 80 year old, there's always something that you want to achieve. But just speaking on ambition, so how do you discern between ambition and calling in your life?
So, look, for me, I think first and foremost, I have an ambition that I have a calling on my life, and so I pursue it. I think, I think it's something we do need to actively pursue, and it's something we need to continually test. Because I don't necessarily believe that the Lord has a single calling on our life. I believe there are stages and phases of our life. There is a big picture, without a doubt, but For me, then they're not two separate things. To me, they're connected, and I think that I think we need to be ambitious in the pursuit of our calling. I think that in terms of being ambitious more broadly, in terms of business and sort of life goals and setting those kinds of things, I think for me the critical thing with that is just to continue to check that is in alignment with your calling, because I have examples of times where, my ambition to do something over here is unaligned, and it'll just be that case of, the figurative pushing against a door that just doesn't open. But I also think I think personally it's important to be ambitious. I think it really is. I think that is almost expected of us as Christian men. I know it's nowhere in the Bible, and it's probably not a great idea. But to me, I always kind of go, the Lord cannot steer a boat, if it's not going somewhere. You need to be driving, you need to be heading somewhere, and then you can be steered. If you're just sitting and waiting, I believe you're far less likely to get direction.
It's like when you step out in faith, you need to step out. You can't just sit in your room
Absolutely.
and in your office.
No, exactly, and kind of fondly look at it and think it's going to achieve or change anything.
Okay, awesome, Duncan. Thanks for sharing that. And just regarding your faith and building these businesses and building the success that you've built over the past few years, was there any moment where your faith cost you financially or professionally or just relationally?
I think there have been times, but I think in every case it was a short-term cost.
Okay.
It wasn't a long-term cost. I think. There was a point where many years ago at Mnet, particularly in the early days, the project that I had with them was all the on-air promotions. So the things that said, watch the rugby, watch the cricket, watch this movie, watch this TV series, all those ads, those little 30-second ads. And all the on-screen design work. So the SuperSport S and the Mnet Ribbon M and all those kinds. So it was all that sort of work. And there was a point where Mnet decided that they were going to explore sort of erotic / soft porn kind of content. They're going to play it after midnight, and then they thought that there would be a market for that and everything else. And the challenge for me was that my contract basically said I produce all of this work. All this short form work. And so I sat down in a meeting one day and they kind of said, well, here's your brief on this content. And it was just content I couldn't do. And that, so I just said to them, I'm not going to do that. And I'm happy contractually if you carve that out of my contract and you give that to somebody else. But it started to create friction between myself and the management, because essentially to the management I was saying, look, I don't like what you're doing, and that was, I think, the beginning. Well, it was the beginning of sort of some friction between. And then they gave it to somebody else, and then the marketing director thought, well, this is a great idea, so we're going to just start carving out this work to other people, because it kind of opened that door. And then it got to a point where it just got really unpleasant. And we had my wife and I, who run the business together. We had to make a decision about what we were going to do, and so we decided to resign the whole account. So we went and sat with the marketing director, the marketing director at the time, and just said to him, look, we're not comfortable, and we're gonna, I'm tendering a resignation. Our contract had a process to do that, and the problem though is that 90% of our business relied on this work. So the second we do that, I know that once again, we're losing 90% of our revenue. And we did it. We resigned the work. And again, it was tough because we needed to retrench people. We'd engaged with our staff to just say, look, this is where it's at and this is what we're thinking. And obviously, some staff were really, really angry about that. And some staff understood it. And so we did that. But the wonderful thing after that was that we always wanted to move into long-form television. And literally at that same time, we'd pitched for something, a big show on the SABC. And so we resigned it, and we pitched, and then we'd heard we hadn't won it, and we were pretty disappointed. And I was like, "What's going on here?" But about, I don't know, 5 days later, we got a call back from the broadcaster to say, "Actually, no, the people we were going to award it to, we've decided not to award it to them, and we're going to award it to you." And so we picked up this new project, and as a result, the business could continue and things like that. And where you could see the Lord's hand in all of that as well was that the sort of short form specialists that we had to retrench, within 2 months, every single one of them had another job.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in fact, about a year later, I met with a guy, and he actually said it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because he went on to do some really amazing things, which he probably wouldn't have achieved, working in that particular job.
Sure.
So things like that for me. So in the short term, it was high anxiety, massive anxiety.
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine. It's not very easy to make those difficult decisions, especially if you need to lay people off. And especially, I think there's this friction between you, standing up for being a Christian and standing on your values, and then having to retrench people because of a certain decision that you make, because they then obviously can also come and challenge you and say, well, where's your value at now? Because you're making a decision which might be best for you, but it's not the best for us in that short term.
Sure.
And I think it's just great hearing the testimonies after that, in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess also with these decisions that we make, a lot of times we tend to think short term, of what's the impact going to be now.
Yeah.
But as it is in the kingdom, and what we've seen over and over again is it's the longer term, our decisions, the longer term impact it makes rather than the short term impact.
Yeah, because in that situation, we moved into long form, and then we really, really grew. I mean, the business would never have grown as much. We would never have hired as many people. We would never, so in the big picture, it was significantly better. And we even had a client once say to me, "I need, that I'm breeding my own competition," which was like, I felt good about, because we'd have guys with us for about 5 to 8 years. They'd leave, start their own company, and then I would be pitching against them. We would be out in the market.
Sure. And leadership, so you've been the CEO of Rapid Blue, I guess, since you started it in 93 until you sold it in 2022. So as a leader, how do you lead people who don't share your beliefs? Without obviously watering down your own convictions. So how did you do that? Because I guess obviously in that industry, in the television industry, there's obviously a lot of different beliefs and different thought patterns and different religions in every single business. So how do you lead people, without sharing that same beliefs?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two components to that. I think the one is that you lead people, based on giving them a vision, and equipping them to be able to achieve that, rewarding them appropriately, and all the those kind of standard textbook things. So there's that component of it. I think to a certain extent, what was different, and I think was different for Rapid Blue, is that pretty much anybody who worked for Rapid Blue would say to you that working for Rapid Blue felt more like family than just working in a business. In the sense that the level of care for the person, I think we prided ourselves on. We really, really got to know everybody who worked with us. Everybody knew where we stood, in terms of our belief. So as a result, we encouraged, prayer groups and things like that.
Okay.
But also, so how my wife and I worked is that I worked very much externally. So I would go and find the business. I would cut the deals. I would package the finance and everything else, and I'd close a deal, and then I'd bring it in-house, and my wife then, as the executive producer, would run the production. So it was almost like she was internal and I was external. So I would always be sketching where we're going, telling people what the year looks like, and everything else. And she was working with the people. And I don't think, and why I explain that is because I don't think there was a week that didn't go by where there was somebody that, my wife was praying with for something or some situation or whatever it is. Yeah. And to this day, even though we haven't, we sold the business 3 years ago, we still have relationships with so many of our staff that, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. We've spoken about this now. I think you touched on it during some of the stories and the testimonies that you've shared with us. So have you had a lot of tension between being liked and being faithful as a leader? Because I think a lot of times, obviously, you need to make the tough decisions. And a lot of times it's definitely not, the best decision to be made for other people, maybe for yourself and for your business and the vision that God has laid on your life. But how have you handled that tension?
So, I mean, it's a really interesting question because it's something that has been a real challenge for me. I think that early on in my career, both in work and even in my relationship, I was quite conflict avoidant. So, and to a certain extent, sometimes this debate about being liked, versus being quite pragmatic, in business is either linked to sort of this kind of conflict avoidance, or other issues, in terms of just your own self-esteem and things like that. So, so I've kind of gotten much better with it. I think that to me the real issue was that I was conflict avoidant. So if I don't know, if you were a salesman and you just kept every month missing your target, for instance, there was, back in the day, there was a joke at Rapid Blue that basically said, like, if I was firing you, you would leave the office thinking you just got promoted. Okay. So it was that bad. Yeah. But I progressively, so I've only really learned to get much better at it in the last, sort of like, I don't know, I'd say even the last 5 years. Okay. In the sense that I think, there was some, but it's critical. It's critical, and I think it's very much linked to, as well as your own identity and where you find your own identity. If you are finding it in the world and in how people see you and everything else, then that is what you pursue. And you try and always fix that and be nice, and and everything else. I think it's much easier if you're clear on where your identity is, and then you can manage that a lot better. I think I want to jump back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier as well. And you were just talking about this idea of identity. And I didn't expect, when we sold Rapid Blue, I didn't expect that there would be a point where I was really struggling, after we'd sold it, even though rationally I'd structured this deal, I'd started the deal maybe even 8 years before that. We had a bunch of really great mechanisms in place. So I'd known for a really long time this day would come. But it was interesting to, once the deal was done, to sit back. And I realized that, and I think it might have come off the back of somebody who said to me, "What do you mean you've sold Rapid Blue? You are Rapid Blue." And that kind of identity meshing or marriage with the business, I thought, no, I'm being very pragmatic. I've sold it. I'm clear about it. It's just a business. We've done really well. We built a great asset and we've managed to monetize it and exit really nicely, and it's all good. But it was a struggle. It really was a struggle. And eventually I went and I saw Mark Stonestreet, who's a psychologist, and did some sessions with him, and that was very powerful for me, just to kind of, very clearly start making that
Yeah.
kind of separation. But it was interesting. I didn't even know it was there. And I think that's sometimes the challenge as well.
Yeah, I think it happens a lot. As soon as you walk away from something, or if you sell something that you've built, I think only at that stage you realize, what major part it played in your life.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, unintentionally, it has become your identity without you even knowing.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. And let's talk about wealth, money, and obviously we're in business to impact lives and to invest in people, like you mentioned. But obviously, without profit, there's no business. So we all need to make money.
Sure.
And that's obviously one of the purposes why we do business, and one of the goals that we have as business leaders and as CEOs. So how do you balance building wealth? So obviously we all want to build wealth, but then also the Bible clearly speaks about, being generous, and just giving wealth away and investing in other businesses or other people. So how do you balance building wealth with generosity and kingdom purpose?
Well, I think, look, for us, for my wife and I, our view on it was that were a couple of things. In the business itself, we would, so in terms of our staff, we would set goals, we would set targets. If we made those, there was financial benefits for the staff, so we had classic sort of incentive schemes and things like that built in. So that was the one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is essentially, from a giving point of view and a tithing point of view, and we are really committed to that conceptually and in practice. So we would do that, and there are a number of projects that we personally kind of supported. So we had that. I think the one of the ways that I kind of approached it was literally on an annual basis. We'd be very clear about what this next year looked like, what we think we can achieve, and then try and do better than that. And the kind of profits we would make after we'd taken care of our staff, after we'd taken care of giving, was to invest that money. Because in our particular business, in the film and television business, it is a very cash generative business. But as a business, you have very few assets, in the sense that every show you make, somebody's paid you for it, they own it. So you have very few assets. You have some computers, and then you've got the skill set of the people in your team, and that's kind of it. Which also makes it quite hard to sell a television production company. That's why very seldom do you hear of a television production company being sold, because the only way you can sell it actually is on future revenue. So from a model point of view, early on, seeing this, so every time we'd make some profit, I'd take that off the table and we would invest it. So we would have a separate kind of investment kind of model going. So that's kind of how we found this balance between sort of on a day-to-day basis. Where we are, kind of now, because, we've sold the business, we've done quite nicely out of it, and we've got a really nice sort of financial investments and everything. Okay. But we're still working, we're still generating money. Yeah. And so from that point of view, our model doesn't change. We kind of keep it, the volumes and the values are lower now than they were then. But what we like now is that sometimes, we can for instance, very recently in the last few weeks, we had somebody from Homebase contact us to say, here's a student, she's done really well, doesn't have the fees to make it in the next year. And so the ability to be able to just help that person get, take care of that and get through the year on an ad hoc basis and things like that is also a great joy for us.
Sure. Okay.
But I think, we've got to approach, and I think you've got to approach your investment side of the business as a business. You've got to be,
Yeah, you have to be a steward, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a principle, whether it's in your personal finances or your business finances. You have to be a steward of your finances, and that you've been entrusted with.
Absolutely.
Okay, and Duncan, if we can move more to a more vulnerable space, some internal struggles that you faced that no one, obviously you've got your accountability, or let's call it like that, some internal struggles that you faced that your work colleagues maybe didn't know, or someone that you've worked with didn't know, something that if you went home in the evening, it kept you awake, you struggled with that. If you could maybe list one or two of those, if you're willing to do it. And then also, again, how did you deal with it? Because I think a lot of us, at work, especially if you're a CEO, especially if you're a leader, we all know you can't show weakness. You have to keep on moving forward. You have to smile. You have to keep everyone happy. You have to make decisions. But all of us, somewhere in the back of our minds or in our hearts, we've got something that's uncomfortable, something that we're dealing from a personal level point of view. So are there any of those things that you can, one or two that you can share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, I have many. Okay. I'd be surprised if somebody didn't have a few. But I think, look, I think this, on one hand, this sort of, this little bit of this journey around identity for me in the last little bit has been interesting. It hasn't been a crisis, but it just has been really fascinating and very beneficial for me to walk through and to process. So we've touched on that. I think there definitely were times, in the business, I mean, and not, a couple of times where I've literally been lying in bed and I'm shaking. Sure. I'm that, and because I'm that stressed, I'm that scared, I'm that anxious. And a lot of the time what that was about is that either, sometimes it comes as a bit of a shock. So one of them was I think it was about 2015, 16, 17, somewhere around there. We had contracted 4 really, really big shows for the SABC. So the total value of that is sort of over 100 million rand. We'd staffed up, we'd invested in equipment and everything else to be able to do this. And then they called me one day and basically just said, look, we don't have the money. We've run out of money. And so we can't do this. We're not going to do these 4 shows. And so I'm back in this place that I never wanted to be again, where I've got a whole lot of staff that, and granted, they hadn't started working yet, but they'd all been contracted, and then to know that you've got no revenue, so now you've invested a lot of your cash, so it's not like you in a really great cash flow position. So we'd have a shock to the system like that, and that was tough, that was hard, that was scary. And also in the sense that even as kind of a father, it was really hard because we literally had to sell everything that we kind of owned. We were down to our house. I traded my car in for the smallest car I could get, and everything else, just to kind of like cash out another 500,000 rand, and everything else, just to get us through the week, to get us through the, and that was incredibly hard. And that thing of almost a little bit with the kids, and they were quite young at the time, to try and maintain this sort of facade that everything's good. I remember when I got the small car, it had this rear window that kind of was electric that opened and closed. And I sold this thing as the coolest thing ever. Yeah. And to this day, my kids will like talk about that cool car. But, I was kind of trying, I was thinking, well, they have a view on this big car that we used to have. Now we have the small car. But to them at their age, they didn't really care. It was just a car, Wow. But
then during these times of struggle and, going to bed, and I think a lot of leaders or men will relate to that, whether you're a leader or not, you go to bed with anxiety and you worry about stuff. And how do you, just from a spiritual point of view, during those seasons in life and seasons in business, what did you practically do just to, obviously they will all end, Sure. I think the good thing is these bad times, they also end.
Yeah.
Good times also end, but bad times also end. So how did you, just from a personal point of view, process it and just practical things? What did you do? Obviously you can't go to bed every night and worry yourself to sleep. There's certain things one morning you need to wake up and decide, listen, I'm gonna deal with this.
Sure.
And yeah, just practical things. What did you do?
Well, I think the fundamental thing was, the second that happened, again, was, we brought the situation to our Connect group. I brought the situation to my friends and my accountability partners to say, and saying to them, essentially, when you're in that crisis, you kind of go, I need you all to pray, and I need, and if you hear anything from the Lord, tell me, because it's going to absolutely. And then also have them, be able to stand with you and pray for you, and that helps, during those periods of time, and having people check in on you and everything. It really, really helps. I think what my wife and I did is, I remember one time we did, which was, we went to the office on a Sunday afternoon, and there was nobody in the building, and we went and sat in one of the boardrooms, and we just prayed and waited on the Lord.
Sure.
And literally for the whole afternoon. And every time we believed we'd heard something from the Lord, we'd write it down separately, but we just pressed in, and that was so powerful. We came out of that. One of the things that we came out of that with, which we didn't even anticipate, was because sometimes we make an idol of something, and sometimes we don't even recognize it, But when it is kind of shown to you that kind of clearly, it's something that you can also wonderfully deal with, because in that point you can then put it on the table and say, okay, I see this, and you can deal with that. So that was really, really powerful. So for us, that's really what kind of carried us through. And there was a point where we were so sure that, look, if this is the end of a season, in terms of this business, then it is what it is, But all we can do now is press in and press on,
Sure. Well, I think that's very encouraging and, motivating, just to hear the impact that your relationship with the Lord has had, on your life and in business. I think a lot of times we take our relationship with the Lord for granted. We become very familiar with the Lord also, and we think, I can only have this relationship with the Lord at church or in my Connect group, but there's so much more.
Yeah.
Just the example that you were just talking about, just going into your boardroom and just praying and hearing from the Lord, and it's such a powerful example and such a powerful testimony, of what the Lord can do and what He wants to do through your business. And let's talk about family, because obviously one of the things about this podcast is also not to just be a great business leader and a great husband, but also to be a great father. And that's something that I found challenging currently, at where I'm at. I think a lot of men will relate. You're in your 40s, you want to build a business, you've been married for a few years, so yes, you still want to be that husband which you promised to be, the day you got married, and you've got kids and you want to be the best father. But it's difficult, there's just realities in life. It's difficult to balance all these things. So how did you, I've read what you've done and what you've achieved in business, but how did you stay close to your two kids? And at this stage, just from what I've heard, when you speak, you still have a great relationship with your kids. And there's not a lot of men who can say that, that they've got kids in their 20s, which they still really enjoy spending time with, and I think from the other side as well, where your kids enjoy spending time with you.
Yeah.
It's something that I definitely want in my life. So how did you juggle all those balls? Just again, practically, how do you build businesses like this, but still, have a great relationship with your wife, a thriving relationship with your wife, a thriving relationship with your kids? How do you do it? I know there's not one answer. How did you do it?
No, exactly. Yeah. And also, it's a journey. You know what I mean? It's not a straight line at all. So, look. So a couple of things. One is, in the early days of the business, there were times when I would travel so much that I was away from home for sometimes like 120 days in a year.
Wow.
A long time. And I, in the moment, I thought, because when I'm home, I'm very present. When I'm home, I take the kids to school. When I'm home, I go and watch them play sport, all those sorts of things, on the weekends we do things and, and all the rest of it. But I didn't realize the impact of that, just not being there over that kind of period of time. And so that is, so then that's one of the things that I kind of look back, and if I could change that, I would change that, But I think, and again, relationship with my kids, it's been phenomenal, and then tricky, and then phenomenal. But you're kind of going through them being teenagers, me being away, them being teenagers, and everything else. But the wonderful thing is that we've always been able to talk to each other. We've always been able, whether it's good or bad or fun or whatever it is. And I think that's been so powerful.
But that's also an environment that you need to create.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, currently my kids are now, becoming in their late 20s. And I think that, I right now my relationship with them is, almost as good as it can be. And I'm very blessed for that. But I have two really great kids, but we talk almost every day. So, it's just truly wonderful. And I think we also make, we continually try to make manufacture opportunities to do things together, things that we like doing together. I mean, it's like anything in life. I think you've got to be, you've just got to prioritize it. It's got to be important to you. But I do think the critical thing for us was just the comfort and from early on our ability to just be able to talk to each other about anything and everything.
Yeah, and just getting back to the business side of things, we're closing off soon. So do you feel in today's world, do you feel that being a Christian man in the marketplace is tough? Do you think it's tough to stand for what you believe in?
It's an interesting one. I think when I was younger, I found it maybe a little tougher. Mainly because I thought, the stakes felt so much higher, in the sense that, you're so sort of desperate to build a business and you're faced with a dilemma, and that the right way to go is this way, but the money way is this way. And you're kind of going, yeah, but if I've got the money, then I can do this. And I think it's tougher when you're younger and earlier on in your career. I think if you're asking me kind of where I am now, it's so much easier now, because I have a lot more control over my time. From a financial point of view, we're in a much better place. So right now, is it tougher? I mean, for me personally, I think it's easier almost for me now. Because I can choose what I do. And if something's not going in the direction I like, I can exit from that. And, it's much easier.
I think it almost goes back to the definition you gave of success. It's having that time and the freedom to decide, what's working for you and what's not working for you. And just, the being hard and those things. I mean, if you are, and you've defined success for yourself and you've worked really hard on that definition of success, I think it just becomes much easier, to just stand for what you believe in.
And I also think what happens is that in your industry or, the people that you broadly engage with, if you're consistent in who you are all the way through, people then get to understand who you are. And so they won't bring you something that they know you're going to say no to, know. So I think that's why it's so critical to be consistent, all the way through, because then when you get to, my age, nobody brings me these things, it's just,
Yeah, it's just not who you are.
Yeah.
And they know you.
And then
Yeah.
they know it's pointless bringing it to me in the first place.
Yeah. Wow. Duncan, thank you. So as a last question, I've asked you quite a lot of questions. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's been really valuable. Just as a last question, so if we had a room full of Christian men sitting here and listening to you, guys who's in the marketplace right now, okay, what would you, if you could warn them about one thing? And it might also be a tough question. There's a lot of things which you can warn them against, but if there's one thing that you can warn them against and one thing that you can encourage them with, what would that be?
If I had to keep it quite short, I would say my caution and my warning would be is that stay close to the Lord, seek the Lord in everything in business, because it will reward you. So be cautious about short-term exciting things, or making short-term decisions based on money or any other anything else kind of that would distract you from that. And then I think for me, I think that the bit of advice that has served me really, really well is to have people in your life who you're accountable to, who you can call and they know you well, and you can be very vulnerable with them and raw and open and blunt, has just been so incredibly valuable to me. And then I think the and only because I'm facing it now with my daughter, the decision you make about who you marry is so critical, because that is the basis of your foundation. That's going to be the biggest decision you ever make.
Sure. Duncan, thank you very much. Thanks for your time once again, and thanks for just sharing all your knowledge and wisdom and your experience that you've gained over the past few years. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, Jan. It's been fun.
Thanks.